Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and many thanks for joining our webinar, Accelerate Digital Now, with hosts T-Systems in cooperation with IDC. So let's jump in and look at what you can expect today from this webinar. So if you could move on one slide, please. So what we're looking for is an energy-filled, informative, and also interactive hour focused on why you need to act now, get inspired with real-life examples, and learn how to develop and deliver applications with impact to the business in 50 days or less. Now, what we would encourage you to do is use chat functions, the chat function for any questions you might have, but also we'll be asking and for your feedback with some polls throughout our discussion here today. My name is Thomas Meyer. I'm the General Manager for Research at IDC, and I have some wonderful panelists with me here today, whilst I moderate, and these panelists are aiming to help bring clarity and deliver actionable insights and customer examples of how you can accelerate your journey and what goals you may want to think about. So here with me today are Peter Lawrence, Head of Portfolio Unit Digital Solutions at T-Systems International. Welcome, Peter. Oliver Queck, Sales and Pre-Sales and Consulting for Digital Solutions at T-Systems International. And last but certainly not least, Jen Thompson, Senior Research Director and Lead Accelerated Application Delivery at IDC EMEA. So welcome to all of you here today. What we'd like to start with, and I'm going to jump right in with a question for you, Oliver, is when we think about digital, and we see that word everywhere, how should we think about that term?
Yeah, I mean, it's a buzzword. Digital is a real buzzword, which is all around. And yeah, of course, in the pandemic situation, everybody talked about getting things done remotely. But the super fast digitization of companies' core process is a tougher cookie. But before we start, let's get a view on what digitization can be in the end and bring everybody on the same page. So from my point of view, there are 3 levels we must look on, which my colleague Thomas Jenne and I also teach to our students, that there are differences based on the digital maturity of the company and yet defines where they have to act. First, digitization, which can be defined as transforming analog data into digital usable data, which is like the basis. Second, digitalization, which means using this digital data with digital technologies to enhance or build completely new processes, business models, and use cases, short digital solutions. And third, also very important, digital transformation, which can be defined as a sustainable change of organizations and society by digital solutions. Every company faces challenges on one or many of these levels based on their customer pressure and maturity.
That's great. Thank you, Oliver. So that sets us up for a common understanding. So it also gets us to the first poll. So dear listeners, dear audience, this is where you're asked to work with us, hopefully, and give us your feedback. So the first poll is around what drives you, the audience. And what we're asking is, when you look at the digitalization of your enterprise, keeping in mind what Oliver just talked about, what is the impression that you have? Compared to others, you have a head start. You should perhaps be more concerned than you already are. Maybe pressure is already building up and change is a little bit too slow coming. Or there's a serious need for digital strategy. So if you could give us your feedback, that would be much appreciated. And what we'll do in a second is ask the panelists for perhaps a couple of short comments as well, just to give their perspective on where we are as we look at those 4 different points. I have some feelings around where this might land, but obviously it's great to see whether that gets validated, or perhaps we'll get a little bit of a surprise. So in a second, we'll get the results, and then we'll take it from there. I don't know, Oliver, Peter, Jen, any feeling where this might land? Do you have any suggestions, or what do you expect?
So I can have a go at this one. So I've got a feeling, but I don't want to kind of tempt the audience to go in one way or the other. But I believe that a lot of people are actually going to be thinking about what they need to do now to accelerate, and kind of this serious need for a new digital strategy, because things have just moved at such a speed that we need to be able to react to move forwards.
Thank you. Yeah, I would mirror that for sure. Any other thoughts from you, Oliver or Peter?
Yeah. In the end, it will be a combination, because there is need, yeah, and there is pressure, and everybody thinks he's a bit too slow. So, but I have a gut feeling, yeah.
Well, that's do you have any? Sorry, somebody was speaking. Peter, do you have any comments for this?
I think it's a combination, but let's wait what comes out. I can easily tell you projects where people had the feeling that they were too fast.
Interesting. So do we have any results yet that we can show? Oh, interesting. So it's a bit of a race between, compared to others, you have a head start, which is good to see. At the same time, we have pressure is building up, change is a bit slow, followed by perhaps we should be a little bit more concerned, and there's a serious need for a digital strategy. So I guess just to summarize that, so most of the audience here have a digital strategy of some sort in place. That's certainly what it sounds like. And there's a feeling that some of you are ahead, but then there's this polarization with maybe it's a little bit too slow in terms of how we're moving. Any quick thoughts on this from the panelists?
I think I've been proven wrong, Tom, but I would actually say that perhaps this kind of, I think maybe it's a wake up, or maybe it's kind of a realization. And organizations don't think that they need to kind of start to rethink how they put their strategies in place. I would love to have that feeling that every organization knows exactly what they're doing and that their digital strategy is working. But I think we can share some insights today to maybe help shape those thoughts.
I agree. I think there's something for everyone in this. If you look at the responses, and I guess, Oliver, Peter, you both said it's going to be a little bit of a combination of things, which it did turn out to be, but we do have this polarization, I guess, of the audience here as well, right? So it's interesting to see. So let me maybe just set the stage a little bit more. If you go to the next slide, but what we can see here is that from IDC's perspective, digital is definitely worth it. There are significant benefits when we look at digitally more mature organizations in terms of outcomes, both in terms of driving the top line as well as the bottom line. And I think that's good to see, but it's also, if you want, a minority still of the market. So when we look at the outcomes, in fact, and we look at the money being spent, which amounts to about $1.5 trillion globally in terms of digital transformation, most organizations are in fact struggling to show return. So with only 16% able to drive new revenue streams from digital products and services. So if you could, yes, thank you. If you could flip, so you can see that here. So overall, only about a quarter is showing any kind of return. So cost optimization, increase of revenue from existing products and services, but only 60% are showing any return from new digital products and services. And let me turn to you, Peter, at this point. It's clear that digital is important to organizations, but companies are struggling to justify the ROI. So can you maybe talk about that a little bit and why it's important for everyone to keep on that journey?
Yeah, I think to keep it on is, for most people, is clear. As I said in the beginning, when you asked for that poll, it's interesting. I can easily tell you projects where people started extremely early on into digitization and then had the feeling that they were too early, right? So they try to do things and they put in money, they put in a lot of money. And then you have these conversations, this is a board member project, right? And so it's extremely important that you anchor this in the reality of the organization and that you do it in a way that you can figure out how it's done best for your organization and how it delivers on the value you need. But it's, as you say, it's very important to not give up too early, if I could say it that way. But keep the expectation realistic. And what we have learned out of it in the projects we do with customers is The real digital projects deliver the value over time. The traditional classic expectation, it cuts costs. Sometimes it happens. Sometimes, yes, because there is projects in automation in all of these areas, but they're easily in very other fronts. So new CRM, new revenues, whatever. New processes where the value comes over time. And what we figured out, you can't measure the project traditionally, but you should not do it traditionally as well. So if you run the project like you run a classic project with a 12-month release cycle or project delivery time and a lot of money upfront and big commitments and super clear targets, that's not the world, right? Maybe there are some, but in most cases, we drove it better with our customers when we go agile. We cut things into pieces and we iteratively make up our mind. Did it deliver to that first expectation? How do we need to tune it? How do we go to the second and the third step and then release the budget step by step? So it's much more like a 50-day bucket than a 500-day bucket. And that is key when we talk to customers, that we try to be there. And that brings people much more to the real content discussion, because it's more convenient. I tell you, it's more convenient if you start a project which delivers in 500 days, or if you are in a journey which ends in 50 days, where you have to figure out what came, and what is the value, what did it change, and what is now a next step. So you are much closer to the change when you really cut it in chunks, run it agile, very content oriented, and then you'll see that the value really comes. So but that is for most organizations another step, because you have to change your way of working in parallel.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. That's a great insight already. I think it mirrors also what we're seeing in the market, and it also leads to some of the discussion points we're going to talk about in a few minutes from now. But it's clear that digital transformation is hard, getting that return is hard, it needs a new way, a new approach. It definitely doesn't mean doing the same things that you've been doing and expecting a different outcome.
I tell you, this is like for the we are techies, right? So you may know an e-function. So I don't want to be too much of a nerd now, right? But this is a webinar. We can be a little bit, I don't know, colored about things. So e-function is like this, right? It's under the water line a long time, and when it comes out of the water, it does this, right? So if Elon Musk with the Dragon X would have given up in the beginning of the e-function, no change. Same for a lot of other projects. If Amazon would have given up under the waterline too early, no change, right? So there is some sort of belief and continuous push in most of the digital projects as well, but you need to continuously measure that you are on an e-function which comes out of the water at some point in time where it's going skyrocketing up, or if you are just on a under the waterline line, because then you have to stop the project. That happens as well. So it's about decisions very early on as well.
Yeah, so thanks again for that addition there as well. I think it's clear that that journey needs more attention, and it's also part of the journey of building resiliency longer term, which is fundamental when we expect the frequency of disruptive events in terms of health, nature, politics, and economics going forward. The one thing I would like to just share here is a slide around how we see so the 5 stages, the transition to the next normal, if you want, driven by the pandemic as this hit of the Europe and the world. And we're seeing very clearly that companies are moving across this now. It's not a U-shaped curve, it takes many different shapes, but it's a good framework from our perspective in terms of how to think about this. But Oliver, I'd like to just hear a little bit from you about what you're seeing with customers, and maybe just chat about whether it's a bit different by size of companies, so other bigger ones behaving differently or are affected differently than small ones, for example.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So we've seen all shades of gray with customers independent from their size and industry. Initially, everybody was pushing business continuity, making it possible to work remotely, focusing on equipment, VPN connection, etc. But after the initial shock, like the cost optimization kicked in, and depending on the situation, they were looking into digitizing internal processes and the face to the customer. And yeah, there are different shades, as I said. If you go to the next slide, companies with financial pressure, for example, clearly focus on smart and fast cost savings, for example, by application outsourcing, but also robotic process automation to automate processes and big data and artificial intelligence. Companies with pressure on safeguarding their supply chain were seeing demands for seamless localization, supplier integration, and flexibilization in the supply chain, to tackle the demand. But what we see, all companies, and if you go to the next slide, all companies are looking into ways how to safeguard their employees and operations to prevent local lockdowns, what we call at T-Systems health at work. And there has to be a safeguarding journey, and every company we are talking with is looking into it for health at office and health at production. And this completely looks differently based on technology and in the behavior of the employees. Yeah. Depending on the site, what we saw is that smaller companies took immediate actions much faster with respect to real digitization. And even if they got their staff much faster back to the office. And yeah, to make a long story short, every situation is specific, has its own challenges, but digital technology for sure helps in all the shades of gray.
Okay, that's great to hear. Thank you, Oliver. That's good insight. So we're seeing organizations deal with the impact of the pandemic. And if you actually switch to the next slide, it gives just a view across the framework that we've put together in terms of where the different regions are, in fact. And what we can see is AP is quite a way ahead in terms of how organizations feel they're dealing with the pandemic. If you look at EMEA in particular, we see that 80% of companies, just shy of, are actually still dealing with business continuity, cost optimization, business resiliency, so crisis, the slowdown, and the recession. But what we're seeing is, if you go just to the next slide, please, that clever organizations have their hands in the now and their eyes in the future. And what they're doing is that the more digitally advanced you are, that you likely fared better throughout the pandemic and are able to see and shift supply chains in real time, deploy workforce remote management, together with the more solid compliance and cybersecurity stance. And the idea really here is that they are looking to flatten the curve. So Oliver, what you were talking about, and Peter, you alluded to this as well, so effectively using technology to accelerate the digital journey. And no matter how far advanced, every organization is sort of beginning to rechart their journey. So maybe, Jen, just a quick question to you here. So when thinking about recharting the journey, what should companies aim to achieve?
So I think Peter spoke to this before, and it comes down to whether we think about it as E function. I think it really comes down to how do we set ourselves up to move faster, be more agile, and truly actually drive this data-driven organization where digital becomes business as usual, and essentially it becomes part of your DNA. So perhaps I think going back to the poll question, it's not about doing a new digital project, because if we're not getting results out of the projects we're already investing in, but it's about how we recalibrate the priorities to allow us to actually move towards flexible working models, rethinking our supply chains, our partner ecosystems, but also how we create that platform-driven business. Fundamentally, one of the things that a lot of organizations tend to forget about and put at the bottom of the prioritization list is actually thinking about what this means in terms of cultural shift. So how do we as organizations move from shifting from the value of learning to the kind of learning over prediction? Does this mean we need to tear up our 5-year plans? Potentially. But we're not saying that we don't need direction. We need that North Star guiding light that drives the mission and the vision, but we need to have a strategy that is based on learn versus plan. And the current events showed us that every day we can't plan years out. So we need to focus on how we adapt and how we continually learn to move forward.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. So it very much mirrors what Peter's been saying as well. And achieving all of these stuff, these different pillars, if you want, are part of building a business resiliency, setting up the organization better to respond and withstand what are expected to be more frequent crisis moments in time. It's also aligned somewhat, if I take a slightly different perspective, so CEOs are still on track, that's on track rather, in terms of what we're seeing, that they want to drive more 50% of revenue through digital products and services by 2025. Today it's only 25%. So this acceleration is really key, and using different ways of getting that and making the right choices. So what we really want to look at is what you can do to succeed in 50 days or less. So this is a challenge to everyone. And we're going to be looking at 3 areas. I give examples with outcomes that can help you imagine and execute your next project. So the three areas are new ways of working, digitize the ecosystem, and rethink supply chain. Now, before we go back to the panelists, here is another poll for you to respond to around which of these three currently is the most relevant in your situation. Again, as Oliver said, it is very individual in terms of each journey. Both Peter and Jen confirmed as well that the end point is perhaps not fixed, or certainly the outcome. So it'd be great just to get your feeling in terms of where we are, or where you think your priority is at the moment in terms of these three topics. We're going to be dealing with all three of them. But you know, expecting that there will be a mix of responses. So we might be surprised again. Any guesses again from the panelists what we might see here?
Everybody, I think everybody is tackling all three aspects. But I would, yeah, digitizing the ecosystem will be the leader in this poll, from my feeling, what I hear in the market and with customers. And
okay. Well, I guess it also depends what kind of mix of companies we've got on here in terms of the industry. So I think that will drive some prioritization. I would hesitate, I guess, and say, you know, maybe those new ways of working that, you know, we've started talking about maybe could be right up front there as well. If you have a lot of manufacturing and other type of companies of that ilk, I think supply chain could be in. But new ways of working would be my bet at the moment. Do we have any results yet? Oh, wow. Head-to-head.
Oh.
So there you go. New ways of working. Second, digitize the ecosystem. Third, rethink the supply chain. So good. That's great. Now let's move on, in fact, into the topic. So it's good that we're starting with new ways of working. Then we talk about digitizing the ecosystem. And what I would like to do is, Jen, just to hand over to you, is for a quick definition of what it means. What are new ways of working?
So definition can be long or short, but I think kind of thinking about a short one. So I think for me, just thinking about the pandemic and thinking about the last 7 months, this has kind of hit home that survival of the fittest is not based on size or scale like it used to be. It's based on our ability to how we change, how we adapt, how we're agile. So I think it really means, how do we re-engineer our teams? What is and how do we drive the ability to actually break things down, be iterative, so that we can actually assess and reassess more readily? But how do we drive new proximity between teams? So accelerate the collaboration, the communication, and how do we shift from this mentality of get it right the first time? We've got to be allowed to make mistakes. And you know, the past few months, 7 months, I think, you know, we're going to be looking at 12 months potentially. It's driven this hyper responsiveness, and you know, we've got to really change the way we think about how fast things get done. So there's this kind of perception that IT can be slow, and you know, that's very valid, but that perhaps doesn't apply any longer, because I mean, we need to think about what's the worst thing that can happen now. So IT actually needs to engage more flexibly with the business. How do we propose solutions in a new way? Not the perfect solution for the next 5 years, but this kind of this MVP, this minimal viable product that kind of works for both the business and technical learning can be extracted from it. So, you know, we're not saying abandon that long-term planning, but we're saying that, you know, evolve and iterate upon that to be able to drive progress.
So how should organizations then be thinking about business agility and ways of working to support that rapid business change, operational resiliency, and digital response?
So we've got a great slide. If we jump onto the next slide. So, you know, in thinking about the way forward, organizations need to be able to think carefully about organizational, technology, process design changes that need to be made to successfully navigate this transition. So essentially what we're saying is, how do we evolve from being prescripted, authorized, structured organization to an empowered organization? And to do that, we need to think about all of the characteristics that we need to plug into that define this evolution. So together with some of our research,
I think we just
Innovation
lost.
Council for DevOps. And am I back?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what we're saying is that a lot of organizations at the moment are in the authorized blue zone on the left there. And this is where technology sits in technology. We're measuring teams on technology benefits instead of business value KPIs. Culture is perhaps enforced rather than organic. And we're operating in silos, so there tends to be a lack of integration, lack of automation, and this translates to suboptimal learning and efficiency. So we really need to shift from an inside out to an outside in customer first view of the product and service development and delivery.
Okay, that's great, Jen. Thank you for that. Now we might dive a little bit more into the KPIs and what this outside in approach actually means. But what I would like to do at this point is move to you, Oliver, and actually have you talk a little bit about what T-Systems has in fact, what's been happening within T-Systems on this journey.
Yeah. So the empowered organization. So I think T-Systems is doing that, and also new ways of working actually for years. For example, since I joined at T-Systems for the first time 10 years ago, since then I never had a fixed desk or a desk phone. So this is taking this agile approach, and to be able to serve our customer needs best. Also in the before the pandemic, we are spread across Germany and spread across the world, and used very much to work remotely. Yeah. But the tooling, which was up front, and you see our change in leadership transformation team meeting on this slide, the tooling is established and is not the key. Yeah. And even if we are really enabled to work remotely, we had an acceleration on 3 levels due to the pandemic. And if you go to the next slide, the first thing is that we now have dedicated targets for so-called new normal. Yeah. For employee engagement, employee satisfaction, customer orientation, but also, of course, in realizing savings. This is also a clear KPI in that one. Level 2, which is then like the principles, is digital first for internal and also customer meetings, if it's possible. Using cameras for video calls, massive reduction of travel times. But still, we see this morning, Peter and I had the discussion that we need touch points. Even if we have this digital first, we need dedicated touch point to come together to be completely aligned. Yeah. But the future is also, so what the future is mixed and online teams. Yeah. We developed a defined new normal release 1.0 virtually in our change and transformation team to tackle these topics. And third is the work environment, the tools, etc. The equipment for home offices, but turning offices from offices to creative space and the meeting points. And this is something most of the companies focus at the moment. But from my point of view, to have satisfied customers and satisfied employees in this new normal, you need all 3 levels inside.
Okay, thank you, Oliver. So there's a good T-Systems on T-Systems story, which I think is always interesting to hear. And I think when we look at the whole new ways of working piece, it's definitely one of the key pillars, and we got that feedback as well. But let's switch gears and talk a little bit about digitize the ecosystem, because we've got, I think, a really good and cool example here as well. But before we go into that, Jen, could I just lean on you for a short description of what we understand, or how should we be thinking about digitizing the ecosystem?
So I think if I think about digitizing the ecosystem, then I start to think about how digitization erases the boundaries, both inside and outside the organization, how it drives value creation through collaboration and cooperation. So, you know, this kind of falls back to talk or taking that outside in view of product and service development. And it essentially extends to an outside in way of doing business. So we co-create, we collaborate, and we integrate the contributions from multiple parties to drive that innovation. It also means that we move from this kind of closed code mentality to an open code API mindset. So this API mindset starts with an approach where enterprise assets are broken down into these nano value streams. And with this approach, the digital assets can then be composed, recomposed, and this can happen iteratively on a continuous basis.
Thank you for that, Jen. So I think that's a good segue and setup for Peter. So Peter, I think you brought a really good and prominent example with you. So can I hand over to you at this point for some comments?
Yeah, I think the when you map out what was just said to just a very tiny part of the reality, We could do it along this example here, and I'm not saying that this is the super biggest digital project we ever ran. This is not the point. It maybe has a lot of public awareness, but it's maybe a good prototype of an example where we made it the most aggressive way we could, because the pressure was like that. And it starts already with, it was very clear from the beginning what you really have to achieve. So when you talk about projects, digital projects and so on, you can endlessly have these debates about digitization, and yes, we all have a need and da. At the end of the day is, what do you really achieve to make a difference? And the difference needs to be clearly defined. So therefore, it's our goal to deliver. Most people feel remembered, right? Somebody brought people to the moon with with that type of sentence. That was very clear with this app, although it's not the moon, just a little tiny app as one part of pandemic instruments. So target was 100% clear. And I think the second thing, which was very important for the Corona One app, was actually that the focus was there. So it was not a project you do as well. When you really have an important digital project, do it and do only that. That led actually to the fact that everybody in this project here ran in the 100% model. Theoretically, it was maybe more a 200% model because we had to get this done very quickly. But I can clearly recommend now from the systems project experience, from this example, my personal experience as well, when you dedicate yourself really 100% to the project and you leave other things aside, you get it going, I tell you. For example, here it was the case that the whole team was taken out, completely out of the current roads. And it happened from a Sunday evening to a Monday morning. So it sounds theoretical, but it really was the case. We got these calls over the weekend from Spahn here in Germany, sent to SAP. And on Monday morning, we had the first 20 people or so, not the whole team, but we took them hardly out of running projects. No, not a single % for another project. Only this project. And then all of those people who ran the work streams and including myself, we were taken out of our normal jobs. So when you feel that you have a very important project, do it, but only do that one. And then you can decide if you want to do it for a year or if you want to do it for 50 days like this one. And actually we're on day 100 now currently. So close to 100, I think next week, Wednesday, so it's 100, Tuesday. And I don't myself, I don't want to do this now for 500 days, but I tell you the 50 days, I did it completely. And actually I handed over my full responsibility, and that's actually what's at the 7,000 people organization, to a colleague of mine in that project. So I was out of my normal job. Not a simple one as well. For leaders, a good thought to have, do you want this? And if the answer is yes, then do it and run the project. And then the rest is really discipline as well. Agile projects and digital projects tend to be sometimes, they are important, right? And then everybody is smart and you do things. For me, it's hardcore discipline to get it going. So when you run Scrum, you do it every morning. This project had every morning at 8:30 a project management session for 30 minutes, then an hour with the whole team, with everything. And then off we went. Next morning, 8:30, it started again. And every Sunday, we did a weekly planning. You may skip that when you run your normal project. But every Sunday, we were there for 2 hours to prepare what do we want to achieve in that sprint next week. And that discipline you need to have. You cannot miss out on one single meeting. And then you get a drumbeat in the meeting which really delivers. And that's maybe something you need if you have a super critical digital project which can make a strategic difference to your company. And the rest here is then more or less a description of what the app is. I'm not sure if we go too deep on that, but for me, when you go the next one, for me, that one, the way how we did it and the dedication, the focus and the transparency as well, we deliver it every evening, a status every evening to government. And that was not written, it was a meeting every evening. 1900, every evening we met secretaries of state. So one level under the ministers where we talked through the status. And we made our, in a sense, customers a daily part of the exercise. I can strongly recommend that. Otherwise, you will not be able to deal with a complex environment. You need to open up completely. When we had problems, we told them. When we had a disaster, we told them, no hiding. When you want to have buy-in from people who are affected by the change, make them part of it. And the first step is tell them what's going on. So full transparency, it was not super perfect material. We just went in very raw with government, very raw every evening. That's people we have met normally once a year. So very different. And they liked it a lot, but I think that's the foundation for success, because when you see this here, this is a hell of complex. What you see in the app is the tip of an iceberg. Under the water, nobody knows, right? People are complaining something works and works not, and so on. Under it is a big machine that's listed here on the right side. We don't go through it. So, and you only manage that when you try to do it the way I just described. At least for us, this was super perfect. We were on time, right? Without having anything in the beginning. So we were really on time, I think 2-3 days, which were due to Apple store upload rules or so. We missed out at the end, but we could do it under strong pressure in a high complex environment. And technically, it's a bit difficult as well, I have to say. So, there were so many people around us who were in the process completely independent. When you would go to the next slide, completely independent from the org structure. I can only recommend that. For me, it was the most extreme experience. We really put them in no matter where they were from. At the end of the day, because there's even SAP and Telecom Systems, two big companies, right? But in that team, that was not too clear anymore at the end of the day who worked where, right? Even cross-company border. That was kind of a fancy situation, because people were like really in a solid one-team approach. And that really is key for success. And you can see on the left, there's Fraunhofer, Robert Koch Institute, we had Daily, Apple and Google, Boston Consulting was with us, Bundesdatenschutz, and all of government. And that was really a tribe which made it happen. And being serious on that, I think, is really key for success. And we had 19 work streams, close to 200 people, not everybody full-time, as you can see here, not full-time, but most of the key streams fully dedicated. For example, in communication, obviously people do some other stuff as well, or public affairs, but we covered the whole enchilada. And ran this then in 50 days. So clear structure and all of these things, no matter if it's a digital project, that's required, and that's, I think, important to get it going. And finally, then we went to the situation where we are right now. I think all of you know this. We have 18.3 million or so right now. We are not happy with that. We want more. But at the end of the day, in the beginning, who would have thought that we get to that stage, right? The Germans are a bit difficult on these things. Now we have a debate, is this good enough? I think all of Europe, just if you want to know that, all of Europe has 20 million. So all of the other countries together is 20, Germany is 18, and the Germans run a fancy debate now. We are not successful enough, we need, I don't know what. For sure we need more, but at the end of the day, in these projects, it's important to know as well when you reach your initial goal. And now we can talk about what would be best for a next phase. And we need to measure ourselves on the initial target, and I think that one was reached. Now we work a lot on impact, right? So how do we increase this in the coming wave or in the wave we're already in? But that's maybe not so important to us here. You have to show, and that's maybe most important learning we have right now. When you go a bit further, there's for sure you need expertise. The whole agile model works perfectly, but it's pretty much mandatory for digital projects, right? When most companies who are fully digital have it like in their DNA was said before. But when you are in a mixed mode, so you run with intent, I think you have to run parts of your business this way and other parts you start to run differently. But I can clearly recommend that the agile model works, but it works best if you go fully through. So you have to reach leadership. You can't have it only on a working level. Your leaders need to be part of this. And if people complain and count how many people they have and things like that, you have to end that. And we need to signal to our people as well that a change is not a change forever. So even I had bad feelings in the beginning when I was discussing this. Okay, now you leave your big organization aside and you do this project. And I said, okay, Peter, what is happening? If somebody tells you at the end, you just do projects now, right? Then manager is asking himself, you like that? But I tell you, it was worth to give the trust. this is not bad at all. It's a super experience. It's the best thing you can do. It brings you forward, it brings forward, and it's good for the company. And obviously I got my job back, so I did not lose it over it, but it was, although it was hard work, we did not have a single day free. For sure, in the last years, one of the best experiences I had. And when you talk culture and mood and the pulse of an organization, when you reach that, this is super. Right? We don't have only easy times in T-Systems, and this is the best thing we could have done for ourselves as well. So that's a long story, but we are really nailing it down into learnings now. So we have a clear exercise internally with HR to really take the essence out of it and drive more change than into the organization along these lines and practice it more as well. And to the outside, we work now on the next step, which is the impact. And I think to summarize for digital projects, it's very important as well that you are able to describe impact. Sometimes it may be cost, but sometimes it's more revenue. But from the start, you need to have an idea how you measure the impact. And that one is maybe the only weak part of the Corona Warn App that was not in the center of the whole discussion, right? We got an order, you have to do it with Apple and Google Go, right? And then you run and you build it. And now we are pretty much in the discussion of what is the impact it has. And it's not the impact on T-Systems or SAP, it's the impact on society. So this one is really difficult then. So how do you measure that when data privacy is primarily important and you have a decentral model and still the press is torturing you with articles, what is the impact, and the impact is not high enough and things. So I think that's my other learning where we should have started maybe 3, 4, 5 weeks earlier is think carefully through how you describe success and impact at the end, really with numbers. It's not enough to have just a story. You need to have material stuff with companies. We're here for a business purpose. Sorry, it was a longer story, but this is an adventure in itself. Okay.
It's quite a story. I think so thanks for sharing that. It's also trying to get that feeling, okay, so what can be achieved in 50 days, right? So I think hopefully, it was very transparent also in terms of the challenges that you outlined. What's good to see that you're still smiling. So I guess there's a learning in that as well. So it was tough, but rewarding, lots of lessons. And you also pointed out that the goalposts, obviously, as so often, the expectation, if you want, of the end consumer as well, are then shifting and changing again. Right? And I think that's probably the nature of projects going forward as well, in as much as we can tell from our experience as well. So thank you, Peter. We've got a little bit of time for questions in a second. But what I'd like to do at this point is move to the third area. So we talked about new ways of working. We just talked about digitized ecosystem. Now we're thinking. Now we're looking at rethink the supply chain. And what I would like to do, just very quickly, if you could go to the next slide, please, is just to highlight. And this, you see some survey results here. We've been running every 2 weeks a survey, in fact, since the COVID started. And what's really emerging is that in that next normal, if you're looking at the changes that we're seeing, is that every company is preparing for the increasing frequency of disruption. We covered that. Manufacturing will possibly be based on smaller market pockets and shorter value chains. So in this environment, companies will have to reconsider their supply chain footprint and transform their operations to make them fit for purpose, and also ready for the next disruption, as well as building out their ecosystem. So this is bringing different strands together. What I would like to do, though, is maybe just to get your perspective again, Oliver, as well, in terms of what you've seen from your customers, maybe a couple of examples that you could cite as well.
Yeah, sure. So, coming back to the 5 possible impacts we talked before, I would to point out resilience and supply chain. Why resilience? Yeah. Nobody knows actually when the pandemic is over, when the vaccine will be available, if partial lockdowns will happen in any region, and they are possible. The ultimate goal is still for the business engendering trust with customers, and digitization is essential, as Peter just described with the Corona Warn App. For example, in Mexico, some breweries of customers of ours are locked down due to uncontrolled infections. Yeah, and besides of the impact of the brewery doesn't brew beer and can't sell it, you also have an impact on society there. Yeah? As funny as it might sound, but there is an impact on society. And that leads our customer into shifting the production to other locations very fast, flexibility involving new partners and organizing logistics from other locations, including toll problems, etc. And this resilience in the supply chain can just be tackled with digital solutions and with digital transformation in the customer and also the ecosystem. One other example, so I'm very proud of, that we at T-Systems enabled the state of Bavaria in not more than 5 days to digitize the entire process of applying and deciding for financial corona support, to keep especially small businesses running and safeguarding jobs, fully digital, based on DevOps, cloud only in the approach over a weekend. A colleague of ours over the weekend developed this project and digitized a whole project process. Yeah. From the resilience you can be achieved by streamlined business applications across countries and business domains and flexibilize the production environments and also the management. For rethinking the supply chains, the pandemic made clear that a fully global supply chain can also be a big risk. See, for example, face masks and disinfectants for medical staff at the beginning of the pandemic. Every country was short on these critical products. And based on this experience, beginning of 2020, some value chains will be regionalized or localized, as we also could say. Yeah. And governments worldwide will rebalance their approach, and also companies, of course, towards globalization and technological sovereignty. So this is something we see in the supply chain, which is really getting back to local, combining with local to really have resilience in the supply chain. Yeah. And what we see at our customers, moving very fast to tackle these topics, and they are keen to get support in pushing digitization towards in 50 days or even less. Yeah.
That's interesting. So again, a very aggressive time frame here as well. And we'll might get to some questions just again in a second or so. And I would encourage everyone, if you have some questions or comments, please put them in the chat. But I'd actually like to pick up the 50 days straight away and actually talk a little bit about what we mean when we talk about the 50-day challenge. And with that, I'd actually like to hand back to Peter again to just talk us through the 50-day challenge. Peter, are you going to talk to us?
No, can you repeat? The last sentence was not there. There was a breakage here.
Sure, Peter. So can you talk to us a little bit about what we mean by the 50-day challenge?
I think the 50-day challenge would be, I think that's the learning out of what I discussed before, seems to be a good time window for a significant digital project to do. The idea is to identify a case, a pilot, a POC, what you want. Maybe POC is not the right word, something which really can go live at the end of the day. So not just a toy, a go live a project to be done in 50 days and then practice what we just discussed in that project. And it's pretty much the idea of digitize by doing, not digitize only by talking and conceptuation, PowerPoints, white papers. Sorry for that to IDC. So white papers are very important. We need the input. In soccer, you would say the truth is on the ground, right? It's on the field. So if you want to hit a goal, then you need to do things. And therefore, we recommend and we offer this actively to our customers that we go for these 50-day challenges together with you guys in projects which can really deliver in 50 days a solid go live result. And yeah, and you would obviously do what is here on the right side. And try to come out at the end of the day with a solid result. And it's interesting when you discuss it, some people have this idea immediately. Some other people really have to think, because they always have these 500-day projects. But I think the challenge for all of us is, do you find the first 50 days of a project which can deliver and go live?
No, thank you for that. I think actually, if you switch to the next slide, so maybe you can familiarize yourself as the audience already with what some of those achievable outcomes might be. But Peter, it summarized sort of the list on the right with sort of a little bit of a checklist as well, I guess, and help for companies to think about.
Yeah, I think there is a couple of things which are always very important for this nature of a project, right? So it's cloud-based, obviously. So we don't see too many of these projects which are independent. There are for sure sometimes some or components, but It's about optimization, scaling, and leveraging cloud technologies in a good way. Linked to that is for sure not only data transparency and insights, so the data science part for us, a lot the data privacy part as well. So when we do these things, and that was for the Corona one, very important as well, data sovereignty is a key question for us. So digitization by nature produces tons of data, and we want that for data science, but we have to handle this carefully as well. So you need to make, I would say, educated choices about your cloud infrastructure as well, and where your data is and where it should not be. And that one has to be addressed in a project like that as well. And then you can go through all of the other fronts here, that leads then for sure to process transparency, process efficiency as well, or to new revenues, new customer segments, or to the insight as well, new ways of engaging with your people. But at the end of the day, the underlying infrastructure and transformation question has to be addressed well. So the cloud discussion, how it relates to the platforms you choose for digitization, and how you handle your data is key. And that is not a 50-day question. That is for sure something you have to think through. You can always change things, but that's a longer-term strategic decision. And in the foreground of all of the discussions we run in Germany on Europe about sovereignty, around sovereignty, I think it's something companies need to address these days more and more. And at the end of the day, I have to say, there is a law, there is now from European, what's it called, EuGH, European, from the court, the new decision, how we have to deal with it. So data cannot easily leave Europe anymore. That is another kicker here you need to address anyway. So it's not that easy anymore to transport data to the US, for example, or to Asia.
So that's definitely a whole different challenge altogether. I think that is worthwhile just honing in as a separate topic, I'm sure. But if you could run the poll, so this is you, the audience, again, please give us your feedback. What do you think? Which outcome is the most likely that you will focus on? And that if you set yourself the goal 50 days or less, what would you want to achieve at that particular point? And Peter, thank you for highlighting some of the areas as well in terms of how we should be thinking about those, and making sure that that we tick all the boxes. But also, I think what you absolutely highlighted, which is key, is that these aren't all separate items. So a lot of these actually cross over. But what we're after is just to figure out, okay, so where is the biggest interest at the moment for these projects? Again, to the panelists, any thoughts? What might come out on top? Where do you expect the most interest? Any bets?
I go with number
Not a bet. This. You go with number two. I'm with number one, focusing on the customer, of our customers.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Jen, you were going to add something? Did you agree?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, I mean, I think that if we're going to take a true kind of outside-in approach, and we've been talking about outside-in for ages, right? But there's just kind of been this almost slowness with how organizations have implemented this strategy. So I think that, you know, to be able to get to this new customer and employee engagement, we've got to start to take this seriously, because I think Peter said it really nicely. I mean, if a team starts to look at the products and services through the eyes of the client, then great things start to happen in terms of innovation.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So let's have a look. I guess we've got the results coming up. Fast time to new customer and employee engagement, neck and neck with fast time to market. So really one of the key issues, and that's actually one of the questions that's come in that I'd like to get to in a second, and cloud, data, and risk. I think that either says that everyone is very firm and feels very comfortable about their risk profile, or it's something that's maybe highly underestimated. Back to your last point that you made, Peter. So that's very interesting to see, I have to say. So at that point, actually, thank you for your feedback, everyone. Let me start with a question, and we just have time for maybe one or two. And it relates to one of the top two here, which is a new customer and employee engagement. Because when you look at Agile, that sounds promising. This is a question from the audience. But how do we engage the employees? Has the speed got to be adapted to how quickly the organization is able to move? And how do we do that potentially? Does that make sense? So I guess, Jen, this refers back to what you were saying, and Oliver, I think we were talking about earlier as well.
I think from, I can start. Or
go ahead.
Okay. So I was going to say, I mean, I think, you know, in talking about this, we talk about transformation quite loosely. And I think it's very important to say that it's got to be deliberate. It can't be accidental. And Peter pointed to this. It was all about discipline. So we have to carefully plan it. We have to engineer it. We have to fine tune it. But it's also about kind of making sure you're being transparent and inclusive to your employees. So really starting to take this bottom-up approach rather than, you know, enforcing things from the top, and making sure you've got those champions in place that are able to kind of spread the message. But be aware that with this fast moving, cognitive load is going to increase. Peter said this, you're going to hit burnout quicker. So how do we ensure that the cognitive load of a team is kind of, you know, measured, and we can actually balance that moving forward? I mean, it's going to be a collaboration across everybody, right?
So this is a bit of a KPI kind of discussion as well, potentially, that you need to inject maybe just a different point of perspective, right? So, so Oliver, you were going to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, the engagement of employees, what you were referring to, is really the engagement has to happen. And Peter told it also in the Corona Warn app. There is no hierarchy. There is a pure involvement. The SVP gets tasked as well as the developer and the project manager, and also in developing the new normal, how to engage with customers and the employees. There is no hierarchy, and then it can be successful. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Oliver. So it's absolutely key. I think, Peter, maybe a last word of guidance for anyone thinking about, you know, I'm about to start thinking about the different outcomes, 50 days. Any sort of nuggets where you would say, okay, if you're thinking about it, here's something you absolutely need to have on your radar.
Yeah, actually, I think I told it already before, right? What you need to be very clear about the target, the measurable outcome. So what is really the goal of this? So you don't end up in this typical situation you sometimes see, and then you derail it more, or you damage the whole idea in your company. So you need to be crisp on target. I think you need to be very crisp on the focus of the core team and the rhythm, how you run the project, and how you make sure that you have all the skills. We didn't talk so much about the skills, but you can imagine it for a company like us, this is key for our own projects or what we do with you guys. But the skills is absolutely key. You can't search for key skills in the middle of the project and then the whole thing is ruined.
Sure. Thank you for that, Peter. That's actually, I guess it's a segue as well to say, so Oliver, there's a call to action here. So if you could move to the next slide, please, maybe just lay out what that means.
Yeah, in the end, it's what Peter said, and Jen and Tom, it's your turn. So it's your turn. If you have an idea, if you want to tackle a problem, a customer-facing problem, internal problem, it's your turn. We have something that can inspire you. You can see it on our website. Gather initial ideas and create a plan how to challenge them iteratively. So focus on the desirability, on the feasibility, on the viability of the project, and then just get it go. Yeah. If you need support starting your 50 days challenge, just give us a call. Peter and myself and Tom and Jen can be found on LinkedIn, of course. And if you like, just share your experience with the hashtag 50 days challenge. And yeah, we are keen to see what you're doing, what you can achieve, and maybe your experience on that one.
I think it would be absolutely cool to check back in 50 days from now and see how many projects have been achieved, what the outcomes are, and you know, hopefully we'll get some great customer stories as well that maybe we can share in this forum, which would be super, right? So with that, we're already getting to the top of the hour. So it just leaves me to thank you, the panelists, so Jen, Oliver, and Peter, for being with us here today, and hopefully it was an interesting, informative, and also an interactive session for everyone in the audience today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you're going to take it very seriously. It's your turn. Generate digital now. With that, thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.